time for the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast.
We've got lots and lots of things to talk about and to do today. Covering the territories from the 1940s to the 1990s.
It's the best thing going today.
Interviewing wrestlers, referees, authors, and other media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great.
The cream, yeah. The cream of the crop.
And now, here's your host, Tony Richards.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. We call this podcast series Personalities, Territories, Towns, and Buildings. And on these shows, we're tracking and documenting the history of professional wrestling from its beginnings through 1990. But we have a special emphasis on the time frame of 50 years ago, where we're going through the year of 1975. And it's a very pivotal year. I've talked about in my many podcast appearances recently that wrestling changes on the fives. So 1945, after World War II, lots of changes, including the advent of television. 1955 was a big year. 1965, 1975 that we're in now, and my gosh, 1985, things really accelerated and the paradigm completely changed. And so right now we're going through this great pivotal year in wrestling. We're profiling the personalities that were involved. We're looking at the various territories. We are looking at the great towns that were part of those territories and some of the historic buildings where fans went to see their favorite wrestlers every single week. I keep getting great feedback on the Michael Norris Gulf Coast show that we did. I'm getting fantastic feedback from Steve Gennarelli's WWF show from 75. And last week, my good friend George Shire and the AWA conversation about 1975. I just keep getting wonderful feedback, wonderful shares, wonderful restacks, great shares on X, and lots of wonderful comments. And I got some great things coming up for you as well. Kurt Nielsen, whose book is going to be out really, really soon about Plowboy Frazier. He's going to be here to talk about that book. He told me it should be out in time for Cauliflower Alley. So I'll have Kurt here at the Richards Ranch talking about it. Also, I've got some Amarillo territory, June and July 1975, that I'm working on, that I'm going to be doing for you. Tim Deals will be back to talk about Tennessee over the summer of 1975. And we're going to be going to something I'm pretty excited about is we're going to be going to the Great White North in a couple of weeks. Wes Maidment will be here to talk about Ontario. Man, he's going to be here to talk about the Bear Man. He's going to be here to talk about the Great Maple Leaf Gardens cards of 75. It's going to be great. And also on that same show, I'm going to be talking to Red Dog Larry Lane, who was in the Calgary, Alberta territory working for Stu Hart in 1975. And Larry's got some great stories to share with you. So that'll be an entire Canada episode coming up here in just a couple of weeks. It's going to be awesome, and I can't wait to share that with you. I've got two guests here today to kick off today's show. Steve Verrier, who has written an excellent biography on the former NWA World Champion Gene Kiniski, and also Pro Wrestling in the Pacific Northwest, a great book that Steve sent to me to read, and they're both great books. So Steve's here and is co-author for the book that's coming out right now that you can buy, Richard Vicek, who wrote the book on Dick the Bruiser. These two great guys have teamed up to bring us a biography on Wilbur Snyder, the world's greatest scientific wrestler. And I can't wait to share this conversation with you. So let's get on now to Steve and Richard and this week's show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Personalities, Territories, Towns, and Buildings, the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. This is Tony Richards, and today we're really going to focus in on the personalities part of the various lenses that we look through in the history of professional wrestling. And to guide us through the life of one of the most exceptional people to ever be in the pro wrestling business, we have today Steve Verrier, who's joining us, and also Richard Vicek. Is that how you say your name, Richard? Vicek?
Yes.
Yep, Richard Vicek. And these guys have written a couple of books before on two very sensational people in the wrestling business. Richard has written a book on Dick the Bruiser, which is just a fabulous read called The World's Most Dangerous Wrestler. And Steve's written a couple of books. I have one of them here that I've read that's in my library about Gene Kiniski, former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Canadian wrestling legend Gene Kiniski. And these both guys, let me congratulate you on your books that you've already got out, because they're really great works. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. So we're going to talk about somebody that the two guys I just mentioned, I think a lot of fans know those guys. They know Gene Kiniski because of the world title. Dick the Bruiser, I mean, he's synonymous with professional wrestling, right? Where does Wilbur Snyder fall, do you think, as far as fans today? I mean, obviously, you wrote the book to make sure that his legacy is remembered and his life's remembered and his career's remembered. Where is he today? Like, is he in the upper, middle, or lower echelon of people that are remembered today?
Well, I think, by the way, you've got Richard's name down great, but my last name is pronounced Verrier.
Verrier. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it rhymes with the water.
I won't forget that. Thank you.
No problem. I think a lot of modern day fans see Snyder in much the way that I used to see him. I mean, I grew up in southern Ontario, but we did get wrestling from Indianapolis on a TV channel from Detroit. And that was in the 1970s, by which time Wilbur Snyder was a middle-aged fellow, still a very good wrestler. But that was the first I saw of him, and that's really all, not all, but most of what I knew about him until I started researching the life of Kiniski, actually. Snyder and Kiniski were very, very good friends. Snyder played a big part in Kiniski's life. But just, from looking at Kiniski's career, there was a lot of Snyder intertwined, and I just became very much aware that, he was a top guy in the 1950s. I did not realize that, but on the back cover of the book, we have a blurb that suggests that, okay, you've got Lou Thez during that period, you've got Vern Gagne, and then there are three guys you might consider for number three among American wrestlers of that period in terms of their popularity and impact. And those are Buddy Rogers, Gorgeous George, and Wilbur Snyder, obviously for different reasons than the other two. So Snyder was a huge star. He was recognized as a very good, legitimate athlete, and by all means he was. So the point is, a lot of people would see him the way I did. It really wasn't until I dug into his life. And, I did get a lot of insights from the Bruiser book as well into the life of Snyder. But little by little, I became aware of what an impact he had. And I think that's what at least I am trying to put forth in the book. And
Good.
I think Richard probably will say a little bit of the same.
Yeah, well, Richard, where does Wilbur Snyder fall in this category for modern fans?
Especially in the 1950s, he's really top echelon. When I got exposed to wrestling around 1966 in Chicago, he was not he wasn't a bigger star than Gagne or Dick the Bruiser, but he was on those cards. And I was totally aware of his scientific wrestling throughout the 60s and 70s. In fact, in the 70s, I was able to, from my home in Lafayette, Indiana, see Indianapolis television and Chicago television. Yes, Wilbur was secondary to those two, but I didn't know until I was an adult that there was a trio of wrestlers owning and controlling the Chicago Wrestling Club: Bruiser, Gagne, and Snyder. Yes, he wasn't as prominent as during my viewing of wrestling as as Bruiser or Gagne. But, he was an incredibly talented scientific wrestler with an amazing track record from around 1953 to 1963, where he crisscrossed the country with his family. He got exposed to just about every territory that I know about, with the exception of the Carolinas. And maybe, in other words, here's a quick list here. When we interviewed for the Snyder book, we talked to his late son, Mike. And Mike says, here are the states they lived in during Wilbur's first 10 years: California, Illinois, Texas, Illinois, California, Indiana, Minnesota, California, Indiana. And I left out a stint in Ontario. He got exposure across the country in Canada and really made a name for himself as a scientific, clean wrestler. In fact, he's one of those rare guys that never went bad guy.
Yeah, I was in preparation for tonight. Last night, I just had a little time, and I went and watched. Got a ton of wrestling on the hard drive, and I went and watched some Wilbur Snyder matches. I think I watched 3 of them that were broadcast from Chicago in the 1950s. And yeah, he's doing short arm scissors. He's doing sit outs. He's doing a lot of amateur and professional moves mixed together. And this is when wrestling was really wrestling, right? I mean, fans were really tuning in, not just for the high drama, but they were tuning in to see a struggle. And Wilbur, he was very, very, very good. Now was he from California?
Yes, he was born in the Los Angeles area in Santa Monica.
And was a standout high school sports star there, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he was involved in other sports in high school, but he really came into some prominence playing football. He was one of the top players in Los Angeles, in Greater Los Angeles. He was recognized as such when he was named to a very elite, you could say, a team listing at the end of the year, an all-star squad. And yeah, he was a great football player. He was oversized for the era and very versatile and seemed to learn very fast.
Yeah, he was a big guy, wasn't he? He was very large fella.
Yeah, there are accounts of his being, in the 220, 230 range, even as early as that. Other accounts have his weight a little lower, but yeah, he was a big guy.
And not just the 220, 230 range, but he was tall. I noticed a couple of the matches that I watched. I mean, he was a little bit bigger than the guys he was wrestling. I mean, he's maybe a half a head taller than the other guys.
Yeah, when you see pictures of him standing with other young men or even with adults, he's usually the biggest and, I think always the most muscular.
What was his college career like, Richard?
It's at the University of Utah, and maybe I'll defer to Steve on the Utah.
Okay.
Is that okay, Steve?
Absolutely, yeah. He did very well. I mean, it's hard to determine to what degree he was recruited by major colleges. Football-wise, Utah wasn't one of the biggest, but his family had a history in Utah. Wilbur was born in California, but the Snyders traveled the country pretty much from upstate New York down into Utah, and there are still Snyders living down there, and there's a community called Snyderville near,
Oh, wow.
not far from Salt Lake. So, he probably had other reasons for going to Utah, but he did very, very well. But actually, like Gene Kiniski, Snyder played only 2 seasons of college football. And probably the main reason is that he married his sweetheart right after graduating from high school. They went to Utah. He had a son there very quickly, Mike. And after 2 seasons, I think Wilbur just felt, okay, this is a luxury. I've got to go to work. He did. But he certainly had his eyes open for opportunities. He was a good enough football player that even though he sat out the game for a couple of years, he came very close to making the Los Angeles Rams the year after they won the Super Bowl. He ended up going to Canada and having a very good 2 year stint with the Edmonton Eskimos. I mean, he was a football player, absolutely. He could have made his career there. Wrestling paid better. He probably would have had NFL opportunities after those 2 great years in Edmonton. And it all started. I mean, he was really on the map, at least in Southern California, for his football while he was in high school.
I was just talking to somebody today about Wahoo McDaniel, who did the same thing, where he played pro football for a little while, but the wrestling paid so much better that he forgot the football and just wrestled full time. Now, guys, let's just talk about his career in the 50s to the early 60s for now. So, who were some of his main opponents that really drew money in the 50s and early 60s?
Shall I answer that, Richard?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, when we did the book, each of us, I mean, we covered Snyder's whole life, but
Sure.
I focused more on his period before joining Bruiser in Indianapolis in '64. So, yeah, I will
Yeah, sure.
talk about that. I mean, the name that comes to mind immediately, just because of the way he helped launch Snyder's career, is Lou Thez. Snyder started wrestling professionally after his first year of professional football in Canada. He had done some training prior to going to Canada, but he didn't play football that first season in Canada. He came back, and it was in early 1953 that he started wrestling. And during a period of just a few short months, he got on the map. He wrestled Lou Thez. Early in his career, Snyder and Thez had a match on national television. Snyder usually wrestled to a draw, even early in his career when he was facing Thez. So that really gave him an incredible boost.
So, Steve, how much of that did Johnny Doyle have to do with? Because didn't Wilbur work out of Johnny Doyle's booking office?
Yes, he did for a time.
And
Yes.
and that show that was national that he wrestled Thez on, was that the Hollywood show or was that the Chicago show, or do you
No,
know?
that was Hollywood.
Okay, and which was booked
Absolutely.
by Doyle, right?
Yes. So Thez, had a tremendous impact on the career of Wilbur Snyder. But as Snyder got into wrestling full time and started touring and pretty much going everywhere because he was in demand like few others. His main opponents early on, I mean, Vern Gagne was certainly one. Of course, a guy we don't tend to place in that upper echelon anymore, but Angelo Poffo, the father of Randy Savage, I mean, had many great matches with Wilbur Snyder.
So,
Guys
so,
like
so,
Ron
guy,
Schmidt.
listen. I grew up in Western Kentucky. Angelo Poffo was a god in Western Kentucky because he came off the television in the '60s and early '70s from
Right.
Bruiser's TV. He
Yes.
came down to the Western Kentucky area and started his own promotion, the
Yes, we,
ICW.
we we do mention that in the book.
Yeah, and that's the promotion that I went to see in high school.
Up to his feet. Fighting against the... Oh, he's on his feet. He throws Poffo into the rope. Ducks. Poffo over him. He jumps over Poffo. Oh, a beautiful flying head scissors. What a terrific move by Wilbur Snyder. Poffo goes for the rope, but the referee breaks that up. Poffo persistently puts his feet on those ropes, and the referee must break it up. What a terrific match this is, fans, with these two top-notch wrestlers, Angelo Poffo and Wilbur Snyder. And now Poffo back in the corner. And he's walking around, trying to keep away from Wilbur, hoping that Wilbur will rush him, but Wilbur won't. He's too smart for that. Oh, man, a real good smack to the face by Wilbur. He slams Wilbur into the turnbuckle and does so again. Now he's punishing Snyder. A kick right to the face. That staggers Wilbur Snyder. There's a flying field. Wow, what a drop kick right to the face. He picks him up and a big body slam. And Wilbur Snyder with an knee drop. But Poffo under the ropes. Angelo Poffo, when he's in trouble, gets close to those ropes. Always looking for an automatic break. Poffo tried a leg dive, but Wilbur too fast for him. Now Wilbur with a half Nelson. Nope, now he brings him over the other way, trying to press his shoulders to the mat. Poffo fighting against this. Wilbur has both arms tied. Oh no, Poffo's got one arm away. And he tried a front headlock, but Wilbur spins him around and takes a hammerlock. It's a tremendous match. These two tough wrestlers in here. Oh, a punch by Poffo, another punch. He keeps punching Wilbur. He charges into Wilbur, but Wilbur kicks him and now punches him. A smash to the side of the head. He goes into those ropes, comes off with a flying tackle. A big backdrop. Now Poffo tackles Snyder to the mat. And there's Wilbur. He spins around and takes the abdominal stretch. What a powerfully applied. It's all over. Poffo gives up. The winner of the match is the great Wilbur Snyder.
But he was a big star, Angelo.
He was, yeah. The first I saw of him was, during that same period when I saw the middle-aged Snyder. I saw the middle-aged Poffo as well, and he was, he had a presence. He was good. But I didn't realize just how good he had been,
Right.
15 years earlier. He was a great opponent for Snyder. And of course, guys like Bruiser. Uh, During the 1950s, Snyder was wrestling most of the top guys and usually winning the matches.
I guess Angelo Poffo too. I think with his manager Bronco Lubitsch,
Yes.
and they were a hot act. I think.
Yes.
So that's it. That's
Absolutely.
interesting because Gagne was over like crazy. I mean, he was even called the United States television champion. He was a television star. So I would imagine working with him that even helped Snyder even more.
It did, especially when Snyder won that title. Um, Snyder, he was such an attraction that, when he traveled, uh, some of the NWA promoters wanted to bill him as the champion of the NWA because of his television presence out of Chicago, especially, and his popularity. But the NWA said, no, you can't do that. You have to bill the NWA champion as the world champion.
Yeah, they were sensitive about that.
They were, but Snyder, he was equal in popularity for at least a good stretch, I think, with guys like Thez and Vern Gagne, even Gagne in the Midwest for a number of years, I
He's
think.
just one of those guys that I just feel so bad about because he was so huge in this time frame we're talking about, but his career was almost finished by the time the video era came around. And with recency bias and with people looking at video, and there's not a lot of video, and by then he wasn't wrestling a lot. You know, he was more partners with Bruiser and almost retired by that point. And so he doesn't get the proper shine, I think, that he would have gotten if a video had been around more.
Yeah, I think you got to go back to sources from that era to realize just how popular he was. I mean, coverage in the newspapers, the wrestling magazines, and so on really, demonstrate popularity that not too many others could match.
Oh my gosh, if you look at some wrestling magazines from the 60s, I mean, he is on the cover and he's got a fantastic physique, and he's just projected as um, just one of the top guys. He was the top guy. So, okay, so Richard, you got to come in here and join the conversation.
Sure.
How does he become? I mean, obviously he becomes partners with Bruiser, but that's not exactly what goes on in front of the camera, is it? I mean, those guys were kind of in heel programs and babyface programs with each other, weren't they?
Yes, that ownership was cleverly handled, and I could talk about two distinct cities in Indianapolis. Let's start there.
Okay.
There was a corporation formed, Championship Wrestling Inc. The president was Louise Afflis.
That sounds familiar.
The vice president was Shirley Snyder.
Another familiar name.
The secretary treasurer was Margaret Afflis Johnson, who was Bruiser's mom.
Mm.
So they were working for the existing promotion owned by Jim Barnett and booked by Buck Estes when they decided to build their own mousetrap.
So was there an athletic commission in Indiana?
Yes.
Okay.
Merle Alt was the commissioner at the time, and they granted a license to Championship Wrestling Inc. President Louise Afflis.
Is that one of those
that
situations?
We all know now who was calling the shots and making the decisions.
Is that one of those situations where the commission wouldn't grant you double license?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything I hear to that effect.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they ran shows opposite of Jim Barnett and Buck Estes from April 1964 to September 1964. Their biggest event in Indianapolis was at Victory Field, a minor league baseball park, on May 29th, where Bruiser defended his WWA belt against Fred Blassie. Bruiser won that belt the previous week in LA from Blassie. So that was the start of the promotion, and by the end of September, Barnett went to Australia and Estes went to Amarillo to book for the Funks. So Bruiser and Snyder started TV on WTTV Channel 4, ran shows at the Armories. They brought in Bruiser's former high school classmate, Chuck Marlowe, an Indianapolis broadcaster, to be the voice of wrestling. They did shows. They started to expand their towns to Louisville and eventually Terre Haute, Anderson, South Bend, Elkhart, places like that, Fort Wayne and Hammond. And hey, they started to gain traction. And by 65, they started doing shows at the 9,000 seat Coliseum, Fairgrounds Coliseum. And hey, they were off. It didn't happen overnight. There was a gradual buildup. So that's the start in Indianapolis.
Hey, let me ask you a question. So,
sure.
When Bruiser takes the WWA belt from LA and brings it back to Indiana, is Cal Eaton okay with that, or was that not talked about ahead of time, or how did that work?
I've never found any official announcement, but eventually Bruiser and Snyder created a new belt.
But was Cal in on
Yes.
that? Was Cal in on the fact that they were going to take that title back? And
You know, all the parties are no longer with this. I've heard people, you know, who are well read about LA saying, "Oh no, Bruiser took the belt, got the publicity out of it." The first day he got back in Indianapolis after that victory, the newspapers in Indianapolis showed him holding the belt.
Right. Yeah.
And I hear the belt was sent back, but Bruiser and Snyder created that, recreated a new belt.
I mean, there was
a trophy shop.
There was a WWA in LA for a little while longer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then also in Indianapolis too. I don't know. I was just curious about that.
Hey, that LA office, they had their own ratings section in wrestling magazines. You know, the champion, the contenders.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal for promotion for many years.
It was.
Sometimes they call it Western. Yeah, I don't know. That label was attached to it.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So this 1964 and 65 had that was a good start for Bruiser and Snyder, and they continued to work other cities because their business didn't sell out 8,000 seats on day one. They continued to work in Minneapolis, in St. Louis, in Nashville, San Antonio, Mobile, Alabama. So they would squeeze in these other towns to supplement their personal cash flow during these years.
I was just going to say, I looked in your Bruiser book just because I've been doing a lot of research on Barnett recently, and I was trying to figure out, because Barnett and Doyle puts Bruiser on television in Detroit, right? And makes a big deal out of him and all that. But then he comes down and runs opposition to Barnett in Indianapolis. And Barnett eventually leaves town, and they leave, and Bruiser owns the town then. But what was their relationship like? I know we're talking about Wilbur, but I'm just curious about this one thing. Like, what was Dick the Bruiser and Jim Barnett's relationship like when Barnett's leaving and Bruiser's coming in?
Everything I hear was basically no contact or everything. Bruiser, in the back of his mind, held a grudge against Barnett. And it goes back to the 1963 Alex Karras pre-match brawl. See, Bruiser got arrested. He was involved in a lawsuit after injuring some policemen. And Barnett basically said, "You're on your own. I know you're trying to promote my cards, but that was uncalled for." So Bruiser always felt that Barnett should help him with his legal expenses.
I see. Yeah.
So that's an underlying
a wound that never got closed.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was the first year they really start picking up business then?
I would say in Indianapolis, it was 1965.
Mm-hmm.
Early in the year, running the Fairgrounds Coliseum.
Gotcha.
Where they had 3 shows, 5,000, 8,000, that kind of thing. And eventually, that summer, at Victory Field, they went back and drew 9,000.
Oh, my gosh.
The main event was Fez versus Bruiser, Snyder versus Kiniski. Kiniski would come in, him and Snyder being personal friends. Gene Kiniski was the godfather to Wilbur's only son, Mike.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, the closeness and respect between the two, and they would always use that combination in main events because it was a guaranteed hot match, that people really paid attention to.
Well, I heard Steve say they had close relationship. I didn't realize it was that close. I'm excited to read the book now. You,
Yeah,
Yes.
it was not just the two men, but it was the families.
yeah,
Uh, Gene's wife Marion and Wilbur's wife Shirley were very close. I visited Gene's son Kelly Kiniski a few weeks ago, and in Kelly's house, um, I mean, there is craft work that, although uh, Gene's wife perhaps produced some of it, it was Shirley who taught her how to do it. I mean, Kelly has spoken very, very highly of the Snyder family, and they were very, very close.
oh my gosh, when I read your book, reading Marion's story and how her life turned out, and then how that affected Gene, it broke my heart. It
Yeah,
was,
I had no idea. Again, I grew up watching him,
yep,
and
right. All right, Richard, Chicago.
In the 1964, when Bruiser and Snyder were opening up Indianapolis, they got a call from Fred Kohler in Chicago, who at the time was struggling with declining audiences, a unsuccessful promotional sequence by Jack Pfeffer, and he asked Snyder and Bruiser to be minority partners in his wrestling organization. Eventually, after a 4-year absence in Chicago, Snyder and Bruiser started appearing on Kohler's cards starting in mid-1964 and up through 1965. They turned it around to where they were grossing, this may not sound like much now, $10,000 a night at an amphitheater card, which in those days that paid the bills and
You bet.
allowed money into the owner's pocket.
You bet.
Finally, in late 1965, Kohler wanted out. Vern Gagne was brought in, and the Chicago Wrestling Club was formed, which also had front men owners. In Indianapolis, it was front women.
Mm-hmm.
In Chicago, the front owners were Bob Luce, the legendary Chicago wrestling promoter, and Buddy Lee Cliff, who was an AWA promoter in the Quad Cities. He was related by marriage to the Gagne family.
Well, I was wondering when did the whole partnership of Chicago with Vern happen? When did that come along?
The first Chicago wrestling club card was January 1966.
Oh wow,
at
all the
the
way back there.
Amphitheater, and all three of those partners were in the main events: Snyder versus Kiniski, Wilbur versus Johnny Valentine, Vern Gagne versus Chris Markoff.
So
yeah.
I was just going to say, so man, these guys are on fire here. When did the decline start coming in? Was it in the 70s, or when did the decline for the WWA out of Indianapolis start?
My theory is, and it's supported by a lot of observers, by 1980. Do you want to go there now?
Oh, I'm just curious.
The decline? But it started around 1980. All of Bruiser was over 50. Snyder was over 50. The top guys on his roster, Moose Cholak, Bobo Brazil, were over 50.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is about the same time when cable TV started presenting Georgia Championship Wrestling on WTBS and the WWF on both WORTV, which was from New Jersey, and USA Network. Those programs had young studs, hot feuds, high production values. After a few years of seeing that stuff on cable, I don't apologize. Bruiser's promotions and even Gagne's lost me for a while, especially Indianapolis first.
Yeah, Turner got TBS, which was TCG back then. He got it uplinked the last week of '76. And then Georgia Championship Wrestling started in a lot of outside of Atlanta cable companies at the end of '78. So, yeah, you're right. That's when the penetration really started, and people started finding other wrestling besides the one they could get on their local television station.
And I'm not just knocking Snyder and Bruiser, because it happened to listen to all these names:
Yeah.
Crockett, Watts, Graham, Owens, LaBelle, Shire, Gagne, Sheik, and Geigel.
Well,
And I
78.
probably left someone out.
Well, 78 is the year that Terry and Dory Jr. decided to sell Amarillo because
There you go.
because of the cable penetration into Amarillo, and it was because Terry and Dory said, we're going to be too familiar. They have seen us every week for 25 years, and they're never going to see these guys maybe once a month, and so they're always going to seem newer than fresher than we are. So they kind of saw the writing on the wall at that point.
See, in 1980, Bruiser and Snyder, with their ownership, had the power to book themselves in the main events, but they did not promote younger talent. Bruiser, their undercard wrestlers and semi-main wrestlers told me they didn't want to step out of the spotlight.
Yeah,
and lose the biggest payoff slot on the card.
And they had one of the biggest potential stars in Wojo,
Yes.
and didn't really capitalize on it.
And with David McLean being the general manager and broadcaster, he wanted to use video on the younger guys, with matching up with music. Bruiser stopped that after the first run. No music, no videos of Spike Huber lifting weights or, anything like that. So anyway.
You would think he was too good of a businessman to make that mistake.
Yes. And this has not taken away the previous success that both of them had.
Of course not.
As wrestlers and promoters. By 1980, they had been wrestling almost 25 years.
All those promoters like you mentioned, all those promoters fell into the same trap. What made Barnett such an innovator back in the day was the fact that he didn't fall into the trap. He saw that when network television went away for wrestling, that studio wrestling was the way to distribute the program, and everyone followed that model. But when it changed back the other way, guys couldn't make the switch back again. And it wasn't just those two guys. I mean, there are a lot.
One of Bruiser's son-in-laws told me Bruiser had to reimburse TV stations for airtime out of his own pocket because the business didn't generate enough revenue to sustain television.
And instead of just not running, the ego won't allow him to just quit, right? He's like, I got to keep this going, even though I'm paying for it out of my own pocket. It's kind of like his brain got into this hijack where it doesn't make sense, but you're compelled to keep going, right?
I was lucky to interview Black Jack Lanza for the Bruiser book, and who was in the business as a wrestler over 20 years, and then probably easily another 20 years as a agent for the WWF and for for Gagne's. And basically, I'm paraphrasing here. He says, Bruiser's 50 years old. He still thinks he's 33. And that all the people view him like that in the audience.
Sure.
There's no one had the guts to tell him, no, look, Dick. And how could they? They depended on him for a paycheck.
Of course. So, Steve, just while you're here and we're talking, did Vancouver territory fall into that same trap too?
It did. I mean, the promotion there started, I'll say it changed drastically when uh, Kiniski Donovan, who was a partner up in
Mm.
Vancouver, um, and of course Sandor Kovacs, when they sold the promotion, they got out. It transitioned to a guy named Al Tomko, who was a fellow from Winnipeg who had been associated with Vern Gagne. Um, and things changed drastically at that time. I mean, even when the promotion was very successful in the 60s and through much of the 70s, it was a very muted kind of TV program. It was good for the local audience, but when Stampede Wrestling, for example, from Alberta started
Mm.
invading British Columbia, as some people saw it, All-Star Wrestling had a hard time, a very hard time measuring up.
I see.
Of course, the TV from other places played a big part in Vancouver. But people tend to blame the Tomko promotional method more. He put himself on top. I mean, he was a 50-something guy, very often the regional champion. And
Was that the Canadian heavyweight champion?
yes, and it seemed he was trying to mimic the much more successful WWF, but
Yeah, sure.
obviously he couldn't do it. And yeah, the promotion just fizzled out very quickly.
There was already one of those. We didn't need another one, right? You needed a
Well,
Vancouver
yeah,
promotion.
some of us aren't sure we needed the first. Yeah.
I'm with you. Hey, Richard. How does this all end with Bruiser and Schneider in business? I mean, when did they finally just
The,
decide?
the first step was Wilbur retiring, and his shares were bought out by Bruiser. Bruiser went on for a few more years, but they got into a vicious cycle. Smaller crowds resulted in less box office money, and less box office money meant they couldn't hire more talented, more skilled wrestlers. So that led into more smaller crowds, and it was just a never-ending cycle.
I see.
The WWA, the group, the indie guys, over time in the early 80s, got less and less jobs at the International Amphitheater in Chicago, where Vern stacked those cards with his AWA people. Eventually, Vern bought out Bruiser, his share in the Chicago Wrestling Club. Bruiser went off to start up with a wrestler, Dr. Jerry Graham Jr., a Bruiser bedlam that lasted for a few years in Detroit, Michigan, and Toledo, Ohio.
Wow.
But I guess Bruiser's final hurrah was in December 1990 at Starrcade, NWA. He refereed Sting versus the Scorpion, which was Ric Flair.
90. Yeah, it was in St. Louis.
And both of Snyder and Bruiser died in Florida in 1991 at the age of 62.
So he's only retired 8 years before he passes away.
Wilbur, it wasn't, it was, the family was very proud of the fact, hey, he got to do what Wilbur got to do what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
Okay. But yes, for both of them.
I was going to ask what his retirement years were like. It seems like they were short, but did Wilbur
tennis? Wilbur maintained homes in Florida and Pompano Beach, Florida. A lot of tennis, spending, winters in Florida, summers in Indianapolis. He had tennis courts either on his property or as part of his condo development. He just took it easy until the end, and he had a very good bill of health, I'm told, by his son Mike, until he was diagnosed, this is Wilbur, with lymphatic leukemia
Oh
in
my.
December 1991. And in that hospital, Wilbur suffered a fatal heart attack.
Oh my. Well,
Yeah.
it sounds like, I mean, I was going to ask about this, but you kind of summed it up. I mean, it sounds like he made enough money in the business, and he did well with that money. He took care of it. He was financially diligent and invested in some real estate. It sounds like, and
Yes, in
sounds like
Hawaii.
it sounds like
Yes.
he was at least comfortable in his retirement,
Yes.
and he had it was a short amount of time, but at least he was very he had a good time and he enjoyed it. He had a nice, enjoyable retirement.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing I
Yeah,
always
one
think about
thing
with these
we
guys. You know, I always think about with these guys is like after they quit the business, what happens to them, right? Go ahead,
yeah,
Steve.
one thing we haven't gotten into, Tony, is just I don't think I don't think wrestling was at the center of Wilbur's life, and that's not true of many wrestlers
Right.
from that era. Family was first. It was family that motivated him to settle in Indianapolis. He was tired of dragging his family all over North America. So I don't think retiring from wrestling would have been as difficult for Wilbur as for many of his contemporaries. I mean,
Yeah, it was something he did. It wasn't who he was.
that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was level-headed, family first, as you say. He made some good investments. Seemed to be a very responsible guy, totally dedicated to his wife, and you're not going to hear many negative things about Wilbur Snyder.
You know, one of the things we didn't talk about that just I'm going to circle back now and ask you is what was the home life for him as a kid? Like, did all of those things get instilled in him in his upbringing? What was his family life like when he was growing up?
Well, when you're talking about people who grew up in the 1930s, 1940s, unfortunately, there aren't all that many people left who knew them at that time. But
But
all
his
indications,
family wasn't prominent or anything like that, right? I mean, or
no,
you would
not
have newspaper
particularly.
accounts about them or whatever.
Well, if you go back a couple of generations to Utah, you see some of that. But no, in terms of his immediate family, no, the others did not draw publicity. Wilbur certainly did, but by all accounts, he had a good, solid upbringing. His father was obviously a hard worker. Um, And the family life seemed very stable. Wilbur got married at 18, and I don't think
Which
he
was
went
a
through a lot of crises.
standard operating procedure back then. Yeah,
Well, maybe less so for guys who wanted to make careers in football in college or
right.
beyond. But yeah, yeah, I don't think he had a lot of crises
It
during.
sounds like his father, the way you describe him, he was a hard worker and he took care of his family. I mean, that sounds like that's what grounded Wilbur.
Yes, I believe so. And yeah, he was a hard worker, and I think he made a point of contributing later in life, in whatever way he could, whether coaching kids or just being kind of the social center of some of his communities. He seemed to be a solid fellow, and I'm sure his upbringing had a great deal to do with that.
Well, guys, I appreciate you coming on. Before we wrap up, though, I want to talk to each of you here real quick. Richard, we'll let you go first, but why'd you write this book about Wilbur Snyder?
Because it was a sort of an untold story during the 60s, 70s, and 80s in Chicago and well, let's say Indianapolis. Bruiser overshadowed almost everything Wilbur did. In the Chicago Wrestling Club, Gagne and Bruiser overshadowed Snyder. But Snyder was a stud of a scientific wrestler from 1953 to 63. And He was a highly respected partner in those promotions in Indianapolis and Chicago. And he doesn't get, those guys don't, Bruiser and Snyder don't get credit for two type of things. First was, they're the ones that hired pretty boy Bobby Heenan into professional wrestling in 1965 and hired David McLean in 1982 into their promotion. Look where those two guys went. It is Bruiser and Snyder who created the teams of the Blackjacks, Lanza and Mulligan. It was under their watch. And the next year or two, the Valiant brothers. So
two of the biggest heel teams of the 70s.
Yeah. So I wanted to promote or let people know the accomplishments of Wilbur, both as a wrestler and promoter.
Well, why didn't you write Wilbur's book first? That's what I want to know. You wrote Dick's book first. See, you overshadowed him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I was not gullible, but yeah, I was really in awe of Bruiser in that international amphitheater when you're 9 years old and there's 11,000 people chanting, "We want blood. We want blood."
Right.
And they're stomping on the ground and on the chairs. That has more of an impact than a flying head scissor or an abdominal stretch.
You bet. The effect
so
that
I'm saying, yeah.
The effect that Bruiser had on me, we didn't get Indianapolis TV that far south, but what we did get was St. Louis TV. And so at the Keel is where my experiences with Bruiser came from in my younger years. So, Steve, why did you want to write this book about Wilbur Snyder?
Well, in terms of the practical aspect, again, through researching the life of Kiniski, I realized Snyder was something more special than I'd realized. And I think Richard came to much the same conclusion when he read the Bruiser book. Now, I didn't know Richard when I started working on the Kiniski book, but when I was getting near the end, I gave him a call and said, hey, you did the Bruiser book. I liked that a lot. Do you want to take a look at what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
He did. And, we had our first contact then. It was actually Richard who suggested we collaborate on a Wilbur Snyder biography. It made perfect sense. We decided how we would go about it, and I'm glad we did. But Richard made this proposal.
That's great, and you guys published this through Scott Teal, right, at Crowbar
Yes.
Press.
That is right.
And if you want to get the book, that's where they should get it, or is it available other places too?
I think right now you go to crowbarpress.com.
Okay. Yeah. Just had Scott on here a couple of weeks ago, and he's a great guy and has published a ton of books and a really important little publishing business that he has there as far as professional wrestling history is concerned. And if you want to get this book, and you should get this book if you're interested in wrestling history at all, because Wilbur Snyder is definitely a key piece of it, and you need to learn more about him. And these are the two guys that have documented his story. Fellas, I really appreciate you coming by tonight, and thanks for being on. And I applaud you for your efforts in preserving pro wrestling history. And I'm sure it's not going to be your last project, is it?
We're talking.
Every time you finish one, you're like, okay, never again. But, you always get drawn back to do another one. But listen, thanks for being on tonight.
Thank you.
I'm going to get the book myself, and I can't wait to read your work.
We appreciate that.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for inviting us.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at uswapodcast.com.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Steve Verrier and Richard Vicek. I appreciate them coming by the show and talk about Wilbur Snyder today. What a fantastic personality and performer that guy was in the whole annals of pro wrestling history. And you need to get that book. I'm in the middle of reading it right now. Just a tremendous work by these two guys, and I appreciate them coming by. If you like what we're doing here in the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, you might want to think about visiting my Substack, where you can go there. It's TonyRichards4 at Substack.com, and you can subscribe to my daily wrestling history newsletter. It's called The Daily Chronicle. It comes out every single morning, and you'll find my birthday list of wrestlers for that day, a salute, an RIP salute to those who have passed on that we want to honor, and an event that took place or around that day on pro wrestling history that fundamentally affected, changed, or it was an important thing that happened. Sometimes it's a wrestler's debut, sometimes it's a match, sometimes it's just something that happened that really affected the business. And so you can get that Daily Chronicle newsletter for free every single day by subscribing. I do have some special things, though, for our paid subscribers that support my work. It's just $5 a month, or you can save $10 by doing an annual subscription for $50. And you can get some of my paid content, like I send out to the paid subscribers an update on what I've been reading as far as wrestling history books and my reviews on that. I just started a brand new series called The Evolution of Pro Wrestling. And my first article there is called The West Texas Masked Mystery. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. The West Texas Masked Mystery of 1935. And this is all from research that I did for my Dory Funk Sr. book. And it's about the first masked man in West Texas in 1935. All about the gimmick, how it was created, what the booker, who was Dutch Mantell, the original Dutch Mantell, he was turning out trainees in his wrestling school, and he had a couple of guys that he worked with that he put in this program over the summer of 1935, drew huge money. He broke the all-time outdoor attendance record, which was standing at that time in 1935, in conjunction with the promoter for Lubbock, Texas, Sled Allen. All of this is in this piece called The Great West Texas Masked Mystery of 1935, and that's available if you're a paid subscriber and you support my work there at Substack. Okay, let's get to the second half of our show today. My next two guests, this is the first podcast where I've had 4 guests on. And so the next two guys are good friends of mine, Frank Culbertson and Mike Rogers, and we're going to the Pacific Northwest to talk about Pacific Northwest Wrestling, and we're going to be talking about the Portland territory in 1975. Here's my conversation with Frank and Mike. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Pro Wrestling History Videocast. This is Tony Richards, and I'm joined today by two guys who have documented the history of Portland wrestling, Frank Culbertson and Mike Rogers. Hello, guys, and welcome to the program.
Hey, Tony.
Glad you guys
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yes, glad you guys could join us. And if you have not noticed, these guys have done an excellent job of documenting Portland wrestling history. There are 3 books called Excitement in the Air, Volume 1, 2, and 3. There's a book called Katie Bar the Door. And then there is this huge volume, the Encyclopedia of Portland Wrestling, which has every wrestler who's ever been in the Portland territory. Is that right, guys?
In the Portland sports arena.
In the sports arena, right.
Right, which that opened in 1969.
And then there's a book you guys did on Hawaii that I have on the shelf, but I didn't bring it over here. I don't have enough desk space for all you guys. There you go. Ooh, yeah.
Here it is.
Yeah.
And there's one
Uh,
correction Mike can tell you. We missed one individual in the encyclopedia that we later found out, and we're very sad about that.
Oh boy.
Woody,
How many corrections on the internet did you get on that?
no, I don't think anybody else
They
realized
didn't
it's,
get it, huh? They didn't get
yeah,
it.
yeah. It's one of the things that I always like to mention. It's almost more interesting than some of the things in the book. It's the one wrestler we forgot, and that was Woody Farmer.
Woody Farmer. What years did Woody wrestle?
Woody probably had one match in 1970.
Oh wow. So I could see how you'd overlook Woody.
Yeah,
But he'll be forever famous by being the one guy you didn't put in there. So
yeah,
so Mike, this all started with a newsletter, Ring Around the Northwest, right?
yes. I started that in 1983, and it was 50 cents and 3 pages of off the typewriter. Lots of mistakes, but it was sure a lot of fun to do.
Labor of love.
Yeah.
What prompted you to start doing the newsletter?
I had a really good friend, Ken Hamlin, who did a bulletin called Ring Around the World. And I helped him out, and he did a really good job. And I thought that I'd like to do a bulletin that was a little more regional. So I decided to call it Ring Around the Northwest. His was Ring Around the World, and mine was Ring Around the Northwest.
And did it expand beyond Portland?
Just the Northwest. Um, it got at a point where it ended up being 10 pages.
Oh,
And we
wow.
always would include an interview of somebody who had wrestled in the Northwest. And those are the basis for the Excitement in the Air books.
There were a few of those kind of flying around back then. I think I started subscribing to the Observer in '86, maybe,
Uh-huh.
and I started tape trading in '83 or '84. I can't remember, somewhere around in there. But I was excited because we only, like many people in that time period, we only got 3 channels, which
Right.
means you were very limited to your own wrestling unless you got the Atlanta station or something like that. And so it was really exciting when a videotape would come in the mail. So somebody invested $20 in that videotape to send it around with professional wrestling on it.
Yeah,
Right.
with 10th generation, so you could barely see it
Yeah, it's
sometimes.
kind of snowy, but man, we were peeking through the color bars trying to make it out.
I was a tape trader as well. And uh, yeah, it was always exciting to get wrestling from a different territory. I kind of wish that I had saved Portland wrestling. I always traded it out. So I kind of wish that I had recorded it and then held on to it at times.
Well, so in the last couple of years, though, was it from Buddy Rose's collection of videotapes? We've got a lot of restored stuff.
Yeah,
Another fellow up there is got a library of it, right?
exactly. Rich Patterson, he's done a fantastic job of restoring Buddy Rose's collection and that went way back before Beta. He had some sort of a VCR type machine that recorded before Beta.
It's a lot more than I have to work with on this Dory Funk Senior book, where I've got 5 clips of Amarillo, all about 45 seconds long.
Wow, wow, that's exciting.
Well, one match about 5 minutes long, a Red Bastine and Dory Funk Jr. match that was replayed on Tuesday Night Titans on the WWF. They took an Amarillo match and played it with their commentary over it. And then there's just a few clips of Senior, one with Dory and Terry working out in the ring, and then one with the Senior just doing a short little interview. I think that's about it. Maybe there's 3, 4 clips or something like that.
Wow,
The rest of it is all digging it out of the newspaper and programs and things of that nature.
sure.
But you guys got a rich history in Portland. We're going to talk about 75. What sticks out about 1975 in Portland to you guys?
Go
Well,
ahead.
I think 70 for me, 74 had been a fairly good year. You had some really good heels. You had Rasputin, Bull Ramos, Dale Lewis, Ripper Collins was here, left sometime late in the fall. The Kangaroos, Von Staggers, Killer Krupp. So 74 going into 75. There was really a transition period for the first half of the year, first 5 months. Most all those guys were gone, except for Ramos was there for the first week of January, and then he left till May. And we had Valentine and a very young Don Morocco through 73. So we had a great history of heels. And going into 75, it was a little light on the heel part. And Don had been looking for Don Owen had been looking for a real good heel to come in. I know in the book, Mike writes about Torquemada was slated to be a heel and come in, and he got some main events right away, but for whatever reason didn't get victories in the main events, and he was off to Puerto Rico. Somebody who didn't come in, who Mike found out, was Ivan Putski was supposed to come in. He had been advertised at the end of 74 as Putski the Sledge. He ended up never showing up. He went to the WWF, had a fairly good career there, and a fairly long career, but that was in 75. So 74 was the first part was, for me, was not the best. I think some interesting people that we did have was Bruiser Bob Ramus, obviously would later become Sergeant Slaughter. It was his second time in Portland, and he got elevated into the main events. If you look at the results, the Masked Mauler, Luke Brown, who would later go on to be one half of the Kentuckians with Grizzly Smith, was in the main events, and he was in Portland for, I don't know, till he passed away, I guess. He was a longtime high school friend of Dutch Savage, so he was in main events. Two people I think Mike can tell you more about was Mitsu Momoto, and a guy named Jim Bailey.
Jim Bailey was from Portland area, and he got sent away to be trained and then returned to Portland. Kind of interesting because Don really was hesitant to use Portland guys at all. And as a preliminary guy, that was just a real unique situation. He wrestled in the Tennessee area as Don Anderson, I believe. Kind of a journeyman youngster. I don't think he stayed in wrestling for too awful long. Mitsumoto was the son of Ricky Dozan, and he's pretty small. I don't know if he got any victories at all. As I scroll through 1975, it's just the Kangaroos and Bull Ramos all the way through until June or July. And then they finally had a good booking idea where they Kangaroos broke the sponsor's television. The sponsor was Tom Peterson, who was a famous icon in Portland, and he would do live commercials in the Crow's Nest. And the Royal Kangaroos came up and broke one of his TVs, and the sponsors decided to get together and try and find a team or different teams that could beat the Kangaroos. And so they called those bounty hunter matches. And so it really provided an excitement to see who they could bring in to face the Kangaroos. And the first team that came in was Lonnie Main and Raul Mata. And see if I can find the date.
They had been down in San Francisco.
Right. And Lonnie Main was the draw, and Raul Mata had never been here before, but it was a good person to, come in. He must have had the night off in San Francisco area.
Yeah.
And so the Kangaroos won that match. They pinned Mata. The next bounty hunter team was Dory Funk Jr. and Chief Big Heart. And Big Heart had been wrestling in Vancouver. So they came down. Big Heart was the person who took the pin. So the interesting part from that point is they decided to team up Maine, who was the stronger partner in the Maine Mata, and Dory Funk Jr. So they teamed Funk Jr. and Lonnie together. And if I remember right, if memory serves right, they had 2 matches. And before the Kangaroos came out on top. It was besides those bounty hunter matches, it was stale. You had the Kangaroos and Bull Ramus, who had both been here for several years on the heel side.
I started to say the Kangaroos were kind of homesteaders, right? They'd been there for a while.
They really were. They were kind of off and on, but yeah, they definitely spent a lot of time in the Portland area, all of 75, and they'd started here in 71 and been here off and on. Finally, in October, Jesse Ventura came, and that was definitely a high spot. Some new blood that went into the main events, and Bull Ramus was his manager. And the one interesting thing that I find this so interesting is they did not let Jesse say a word, which in hindsight becomes,
which was his strength.
Right. And yeah, they never let him say a word, and Bull Ramus was his manager.
So tell me a little bit about Ed Francis.
Ed Francis wrestled in the 50s in Portland. He was the first Northwest champion in like 1957. He'd been a journeyman wrestler. At one point, he held the NWA junior heavyweight title.
He was Gentleman Ed, right?
Gentleman Ed Francis, yes. He had not been wrestling, but his son, Bill Francis, started wrestling. And Bill was a big raw bone kid in the preliminaries. He was tall. He was probably 6'4", young and skinny. If I remember right, the Kangaroos attacked him, and then that brought Ed Francis into the area to watch Bill's back, and they formed a tag team and feuded with the Kangaroos.
And then his other son, Russ, got involved too a little bit, right? He was a football player, right, in the NFL?
Right. Probably a couple years later, if I remember right, maybe, or at least 1 year later, he came into wrestling. And he really didn't have that many matches, mainly because he was so involved in football, and I'm sure football frowned on him to a degree. But yeah, Russ became a very highly respected, highly decorated tight end.
Yeah, he went to in wrestling. He was super protected too. He went to the AWA and had some success there. And I think Mike looked at and can't find a single time when, as in an individual match, that Russ ever took a pin. Whether it was all the time that he spent in Hawaii or in Portland and other areas, even in the AWA, he was so protected. And part of it was because of his NFL background.
That I was looking here on the cards in April 12th, Russ Francis and Tony Bourne go to a draw. And then the next week on Saturday the 19th, Benny Ramirez and Bill Francis go to a draw.
You will find a lot of draws in the preliminary matches in Portland wrestling.
I just thought it's pretty interesting. Those two brothers back-to-back weeks, each of them go to a draw. To your point about him being protected.
The other person that 2 other people came in later in 75 besides Jesse that had an impact was Keith Franks, Adrian Adonis, and then a guy named Johnny Eagles, who from England, and he was for Portland, one of those scientific wrestlers who knew all the holds. And Mike has a real penchant for those scientific preliminary guys. But Johnny really was elevated up into the main event, unlike a Lynn Shelley or an Eric Froelich or name another one, Mike, who's another babyface.
Bobby Nichols.
Bobby Nichols, there you go. And Johnny Eagles, an interesting note about him was not only was he had the big eagle tattooed across his chest, he's responsible for me getting my first television gig in professional wrestling.
Wow.
So in 1988, Pacific Coast Championship Wrestling was raising from the ashes of the Billy Jack Haynes failed promotion. The two TV announcers were Johnny Eagles and another gentleman who was ran for public office here and had been a sports announcer. And Johnny Eagles, for some reason, would not stop talking about steroid use when one particular wrestler named Ole Olson was in the ring. I had been told that they tried to get Johnny Eagles to stop talking about steroid use in pro wrestling, and he wouldn't. And so him and Cliff Zahner, the announcer, were gone. I had sent in some demo tape to the promoter saying, hey, I can do a better job than these guys. And he called me up and said, yeah, come on, be on television. And so because of Johnny Eagles, that was my start on professional wrestling as a television announcer.
Wow, what a great story. He had been in Oklahoma the first part of the latter part of 74, first part of 75 for McGurk. And the guys that I've talked to in the business at the time say he was a legit tough dude. I mean, he was not somebody to mess around with. That he was a shooter kind of tough guy.
Yeah, I think I had an interview with him, and he talked about doing his training in Wiggum, which has a reputation of
turning out shooters,
producing a lot of shooters.
Yeah. Billy Riley. That school in Wigan is world famous for those kinds of guys. Tell me about Don Owen.
Don was a crusty gentleman. He was pessimistic. He always talked about the mills shutting down in Oregon, and he was going to have to shut down by the next week, or certainly in the next couple weeks. Despite the fact that he ran for years and years and years and years, the boys always talked about him saying he was probably only going to last one more month. I think he let most of the wrestlers do their own booking, and it's interesting. I've asked some of the wrestlers in the interviews, in the last interviews that I did, tried to pinpoint what Don Owen really knew about wrestling. Like if he could point out good workers or give advice about guys working, and he just pretty much left that up to the guys.
Yeah, if you read Lynn Denton's book, being a booker for him was not a lot of fun. I'm just curious on you guys' viewpoint.
Well, Mike actually tried to interview him and got a response from Don Owen.
Yeah, that's a funny story. When the Owens were having their 60th anniversary show, I sent him a letter and said I'd love to come interview him. And I pictured us just walking his ranch and telling stories. And so I got the letter back, and he said, "You're that gosh darn guy who keeps printing that bulletin with all the results in it." And he was not very happy with me. But to give him credit, he did do a very, very basic interview, and he answered some questions, and he did a fine job.
Well, and two Don Owen related stories. One of the guys in the territory at the time we're talking about is Rocky Montero. And Rocky, most wrestlers found Don either to be a good payoff guy, a fair payoff guy, but very few ever had bad things to say about him, except Rocky Montero. And he had been injured in a match. There was a deal that on some of the passes, there was a note on the back that said $2 for every free pass was being given into a wrestler fund to pay for injuries. And so then Rocky got injured and he had to have an operation. So he went to Don and wanted to get some of that money. And then Don had to tell him that was just a gimmick. There was no wrestler's fund.
Oh, boy.
So Rocky didn't like him, but surprisingly, Rocky loved Roy Shire, who most of the wrestlers didn't like at all. So Rocky was a little bit different. I didn't ever meet, well, actually, I have a picture of me and Don Owen together, but I don't remember why. But you mentioned Lynn Denton, the grappler. And so when I started doing Portland wrestling in 2001, one of the things we wanted to do was to do a cage match. It was going to be the grappler versus Ed Moondog Moretti. But we wanted the cage. And so got a hold of Barry Owen in Eugene, and he said he still had the cage and we could come down and get it. So Grappler and I went down to visit Barry Owen. The cage is sitting out in a field, all torn apart, grass growing up through it. But he said we could have it. So we went out there to get it, and we're all talking. And then Barry Owens' wife starts coming out of the house to bring us something to drink. And Barry automatically goes, kayfabe, kayfabe. And supposedly, when she left, Barry explained, I never smartened her up to the business. And this is in 2002.
Right.
So very unusual. And then Barry was very gracious and took Grappler and me up to Don's house after he had passed. And it was left just like he had been there the day before. And all the boxes of items and notepads and things were laying all around. It was, for me, it was like, oh, this is like holy ground to walk into it.
Well, sure.
I wish I had been able to go through some of the boxes. There was a Tom Peterson cutout, which had been something Tom was really proud of. And one of the heels had ripped the heads off of one time. And Tom Peterson was legitimately pissed because back in the day, those were not cheap. But Don was one of those guys, and Mike was there the night that Don actually retired from wrestling. So it was not the 22,000 or 2,500 people that were there. There was a couple hundred, as Mike would tell you.
Yeah, the fun thing about going to wrestling at the Portland Sports Arena, it was an old converted bowling alley. And they had the crow's nest where they would do the interviews right in the middle of the building. And I imagine when it was a bowling alley, that was the spot where you probably got your shoes. And it was covered in chicken wire, and there was seats just to the right of the crow's nest. And that's usually where I would like to sit. And then when a fall would happen in the ring, you knew there was going to be interviews right after that. So I would get up from my seat, take 3 steps, and I'd be at the crow's nest, and there was chicken wire there. And the cameramen would turn around. The wrestlers were facing in my direction, but I always would try to take pictures, and you had to try to shoot around the cameramen. They never stood in exactly the same spot when they swung their cameras around. So one time I brought toenail clippers and clipped a circle in the chicken wire so I could fit my camera lens through. And I would go several times, and I had about 3 circles cut where I could, if the cameramen were in my way, I could just scoot over about a foot and have another pathway to try to get some pictures.
That's awesome.
And, I ended up getting great pictures because it was well lit. And they were doing their interviews, so yeah, that turned out to be an optimum area to take pictures.
There's a young wrestler he'd been in Kansas City for the last part of 74. He's in Texas right now, working in the Dallas office, and he will work his way through LA. But somebody who's really well associated with Portland is Roddy Piper. When will he show up in Portland?
off the top of
So
my head.
Rose, so
Seven-
76, as we the last half of 75 is pretty solid with Franks and Eagles and Jesse Ventura. Savage and Ramos renew their feud, which really helped elevate those two, and they would feud in their coal miners gloves or Indian strap matches for a number of years. And then in 76, in August, another major change in Portland wrestling happened, and that was when Playboy Buddy Rose arrived. And that changed everything immediately. Jesse Ventura and Rose became a team. Suddenly, Ventura was talking, which was a completely 360-degree change from where he had been. So 76 is pretty good. And then, as you mentioned, Roddy Piper comes in, and that's one of the feuds people remember forever.
Had he gained some weight by then? Because in Texas, in 75, he was really small. He was really skinny.
He debuted in October 7th of 1978. So he had put on a little bit of size, spent a lot of time in Los Angeles prior to that.
Yeah. Had the famous program with the Guerreros.
Right. The one thing that is kind of interesting when you talk about Buddy Rose and Roddy Piper, when there was always a pattern in Portland when a new heel came in that was slated to be on top, it would always be a really convincing win the first 2 weeks. Maybe they would win a battle royal the second or third week. And then after that, they'd be set for main events. Buddy Rose had one of the more unique debuts because he debuted in the main event. And he had never been in main events. He came from the Texas area right before that. So there was a lot of faith put into Buddy Rose right from the get-go. And I really think what happened was Red Bastien gave him his sign of approval. Mm-hmm. And I think that must have carried a lot with Don to put Buddy in the main event right from the very first week.
I think that happened with Roddy in L.A. as well. I think Red vouched for him going into L.A. Red was not only an outstanding booker, but just had so much respect.
Yeah. And it's similar or actually different with Roddy. I'm sure that Red put a word in for Roddy, but at the time you had Buddy Rose, Ed Wiskowski, and Killer Brooks debuted on the same day that Roddy did. Now, Killer Brooks is a prototype Portland wrestling heel. He's slated to be on top. I really don't think Don had main event plans for Piper because you have those three top heels, and then Piper's probably figured for semi-main events and preliminaries. But he was obviously so charismatic. He formed a team with Brooks, and you just couldn't keep Piper out of the main events.
That's kind of interesting. Earlier, you said that a lot of the guys did their own angles and bookings and things like that. But did Don sort of determine the pecking order? Did he sort of give them all right, these guys are going to work on top, these guys are going to work mid card, these guys are going to be working opening matches, or how did that work?
I would expect that Don had some say, like who is going to be in the main events and everything. And then let them figure out their issues and their angles. I'm speculating on that, but I would think that Don would have his say so on who should be on top, and then he just let the other guys figure out.
It's a little bit sketchy and difficult to find results in the Portland territory besides Portland. There's some results from Salem. There's some results from Roseburg. And there were usually once a month there was a show in Seattle. What were some other, was there a regular loop that ran?
There was a regular loop. Salem was always Thursday night. Eugene was always Friday night. Portland was always Saturday night. Portland would have a show, a special show on Tuesday nights, probably about once a month. Then they'd run Medford on Wednesdays once a month, Seattle on Wednesdays once a month. Sundays and Mondays were spot shows like Seaside, Lincoln City, Pendleton, Roseburg was a Wednesday night, once a month or so. So there was a loop. They wrestled every night.
Mhm. There, Eugene, I have a hard time finding any results from Eugene on Fridays. Um, the Portland results are out there for sure, but some of the other towns aren't.
Right. And yeah, I'm looking through. I don't see any Eugene results for 75 either. They were in the paper, and you had to either have a way. I would always, when I was doing the bulletin, I would go to the Portland State Library at the end of the month and look through the Salem papers, the Eugene papers, and get those results. Um, or sometimes I would have a correspondent in one of the spot towns and get some extra results like that.
When you guys talk to people about Portland wrestling, what is the one big thing that people don't realize about it that didn't grow up there? That they're just learning about it. What's the one thing that always comes out that they were surprised by?
The one thing that I would say is Portland's a Portland's the biggest town in Oregon and one of the biggest towns in the Northwest. But there wasn't a lot of things to do. The Trailblazers started in 1972. So Portland wrestling was one of the few forms of entertainment around. And with the strong TV, and for years it was live, um, it had such a tradition. Even people who weren't wrestling fans knew of Lonnie Main and Tony Bourne, and later Roddy Piper and Buddy Rose. So there was just such a strong TV that fostered the tradition.
And they were real heroes to the culture at the time. When you talk about Maine and Bourne, in 68, March was their very first, where they broke up and they feuded at Memorial Coliseum, which was an iconic auditorium in the world at that time, because it was called the Glass Palace. It was one of the few ones like Madison Square Gardens, that level. I happened to go there with my grandparents, and my dad took me to the Maine Bourne #1. But it was 7,000, 8,000 people, which was a huge crowd in Portland at that time. And Maine had been here since late 60s, but his real run was with Bourne through about 1968 to 70. And after that, he was really rarely here. Although if you talk to people today, they will say Lonnie Main was here every single Saturday night because he was so ingrained for so many years. It's like his presence was always here. But he was only here 1 week in 73. He had 2 matches in 74, 5 or 6 matches in 75, was gone in 76 and came back for his last run in 77 before his unfortunate passing. Mm-hmm. But those people, and Tony Bourne, the same way. There's iconic photo that Mike has of Tony, and people see that right away, and they know right away. There's memories that come flooding back of tough Tony Bourne and Lonnie Main, and how they were treated, and how Lonnie was so miserably treated by Tony Bourne. So those were things that there wasn't anything else going. There was a minor league hockey team, which would be at AAA level, Portland Buckaroos. There was the Portland Beavers AAA baseball team. But other than that, it was Portland wrestling on Saturday nights. And if you were fortunate enough to live in Salem, which I was not, so you could go see Salem wrestling on Thursday and then see Portland wrestling on Saturday. So I think Salem was probably the place to live, but it's just an institution in Portland. That's why Mike and his, I don't know if you can see it, it's Katie Bar the Door.
I'll show it.
Okay.
You were fading into your background there.
Yeah. Katie Bar the Door. has sold so well is because people want to remember how the Portland wrestling really was. And you talk about my background. Let's see this way. That's a Dandy Sandy bar. That's a picture from Rich Patterson, who had the Buddy Rose tapes as he was sitting in the crow's nest. That's the view from the crow's nest, the desk, and that was the Portland wrestling ring. You can see the bleachers are behind them. And then there was a few rows of seats right underneath the crow's nest, and then seats on the side. And a sellout was legitimately 2,500 people with standing room only. But oftentimes it would be 1,500 to 2,000. So it was the thing to go do on a Saturday night. Yeah.
It was a small family local business, which a lot of professional wrestling promotions were back in those days.
Right. And because of certain rules that the commission had, some of the bigger companies, the WWEF, did not come to Portland for a long time because of some drug testing that people didn't want to go through for some reason. Mm-hmm. And until it was eventually changed and became entertainment wrestling through some legislation action.
Did they issue more than one license in Oregon?
Oh, that's a great story, Mike.
There was a tradition of only having one licensed promoter, and that stretches way back to where the Owens actually started. There was a promoter here named Ted Thigh, mm-hmm. and he would travel to Australia half of the year. So he'd work in the Northwest, and then he'd travel to Australia. And Herb Owen, Don Owen's dad, was working for Ted Thigh. I don't think he had much of a wrestling background at that point. But when Thigh left, Herb Owen licensed it in his name, Herb Owen's name. And so he took over the promotion in that respect. Later on in the 60s, Kurt von Poppenheim wanted to promote. And that became a contentious court battle. And eventually it was ruled that there could only be one promotion in Oregon. And so Kurt von Poppenheim was denied a license. That had been a rule for quite some time. There was several promotions during the 40s and 50s, but they were deemed differently because one promotion was heavyweights, and then the other promotion was the lighter weight wrestlers.
That's the same thing that happened in Tennessee.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's how Roy Welch and Nick Goulas promoted Nashville. They came in with the junior heavyweights. And so you had to be affiliated with a nonprofit also organization.
Interesting.
Yeah. You had to be sponsored by a VFW hall or somebody like that. So they got a sponsorship with, I think it was the VFW in Nashville, and brought in the Southern Junior Heavyweight title to get promotional rights in Nashville.
Interesting. Yeah. Surprisingly, the heavyweights, who had some big names, it was the Owen promotion of the lighter heavyweights that endured and kept on promoting for years and years and years.
Yeah, was that 180, 200? What was a junior heavyweight in those days?
Yeah, I would say certainly under 200 pounds. And they were done in that interview that I did. He always talked about having wrestlers. He called them action wrestlers, guys who would move and keep the crowd interested. I don't think he liked the bigger guys who went into rest holds too much. He always called them action wrestlers.
Isn't that kind of interesting that whatever your first is, that is what you like from then on, right? Sure. And so that's why so many of us like the territorial wrestling, is because that was the wrestling we saw first.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about what is an action wrestler as opposed to a mat wrestler. I mean, Al Madrill, when he came in, was a very young, fresh-faced baby face, as opposed to the grizzly old I hate kids thing that he did for years in Portland afterwards. But he would have the drop kick, And that was like, wow, who did that? You were action, but you weren't flying around. The things that you see today, there was no one doing planches. People coming off the second rope or the top rope for Lonnie Main was unheard of. So there were things that were different back then. Chris Adams, when he came in, debuted the super kick, which hadn't been done here before. Mike and I were just talking about finishing moves the other day, and Dutch Savage broke out the pile driver in Portland, which was a finishing move. Ripper Collins had the Opu drop. So other than that, there weren't a lot of finishing moves. Beauregard did the thumb, Savage did the thumb, Savage did the knee pad. Dutch had a lot of gimmicks, including controlling some of the wrestling.
Let's talk about Rick Drayson. They gave Rick Drayson a gimmick. He was Rick Headlock Drayson. And he actually got a couple wins with cranking on the headlock for 10 repetitions. And then he was able to pin a couple guys on his debut after 10 cranks of the headlock.
That's awesome.
But other than that, with the full Nelson was used by Ramos, Ventura, Billy Jack Haynes. That was a finishing move. And then Mike and I are going to be doing very shortly a Portland Wrestling recap of a Roddy Piper match with Rick Martel against the Sheepherders. And in that 2 out of 3 fall match, the first 2 falls are tap outs, which as I'm watching that, I can't ever remember other than full Nelson when there was a tap out in Portland wrestling. That's one of the things that was so unique about this time period. They were usually falls. The heel cheated somehow if he was going to get it, whether it was Mr. Fuji or Haru Sasaki using the illegal karate chop to the throat. Judo chops were legal, as Frank Bonham would tell you, but the karate chop was lethal. And so that's going to be coming up. So Portland was definitely we're going to have disqualifications. We will have countouts, but usually there was some sort of a finish coming up. I do want to mention that later in '75, one of the things that is interesting, the women returned to action in Portland. It had been viewed as unconstitutional by the state for women wrestlers.
Oh, no.
To be in the ring. And so it eventually got overturned. It took several years and several attempts at bills to get it overturned. But in '75, women wrestling returned to Portland. Was never a big draw. I mean, it was kind of like when the midgets would come in or Andre, it was something to see, but they were never here for very long.
Yeah, and a lot of territories in the early 70s, 73, 74, 75, you had a lot of, you almost had a women's match. They would come in and work the territory for a month. And then inside that, you'd have mixed tags. You'd have a guy and a woman against a guy and a woman. Then you'd have a woman and a midget against a woman and a midget. And then sometimes you'd have a guy and a woman and a midget against a 6-person tag, right? That would be mixed. So you guys didn't have any of that, right? Because you didn't have any women.
We had none up till
until 75.
Yeah,
exactly. One of the interesting things that they did, I think, both with the ladies and midgets, usually 4 ladies and 4 midgets would come in, and they would split the cards with the extra wrestlers. They could send 2 midgets to one town, have another card in another town, send 2 midgets to that card as well. And with the extra, they could have a midget match, a mixed tag, and then a main event. And so they kind of use those extra wrestlers and then have a whole new show. It's where they could have 2 shows in one night in different towns.
Yeah, Lord Littlebrook lived in Amarillo, and he was sort of the moolah of the midget wrestlers. He had a whole crew that he would send, that he would travel with, and he would send out as well. Who were the women that came in for the first part of having
That
women back in Portland?
that first crew was Sue Green, Paula Kay,
The Texan
Jean Antone,
and Betty
and
Nicolai, I bet.
Betty Nicolai was there.
Yeah.
Paula Kay was there. I know that's five. I'm thinking, oh, Sandy Parker. So right in that time period, they used six ladies, and I'm sure they were splitting cards, and a couple of them might have been in and out.
Yeah, Betty and Jean traveled together from the Missouri, Kansas City office, and they were both from St. Joseph, I think, and they worked against each other for years. And then Susan Green and Paula Kay worked together a lot too.
Yeah, I saw a card in Seaside in 1975, and I think Sue Green really got hurt in that match because it was a real strange ending. I think she got counted out, and it was the point where you were expecting her to come back and make her big comeback, and they just ended up counting her out. And even 1975, I would have been 15. I recognized that it was an unusual finish.
Uh, Speaking of finishes, did you have many referee stoppages in Portland where the ref stopped the match because a guy couldn't go on or it was an unusual brawl or something like that?
It stopped for blood.
Uh-huh. Did
They
you have
did,
those?
yeah, they did stop for blood a little bit, but they didn't overuse that too much. Here, let me tell you about one thing that they always did in Portland that I really ended up disliking. Um, a heel would be going for a pin or some sort of a hold, and the babyface would tap the heel on the back, pretending that that was the referee that was tapping him. Now, the heels never broke for anything except for that fake tap, like the referee's tapping them on the back.
So if it was the actual referee, they never would have broke it.
Exactly. And they did that week after week after week, and it was something that I really ended up not liking. It always got kind of a laugh from the crowd, but that was the one thing that was overused.
The guys are sitting there thinking, this is getting over. We better keep doing this. And you're like, no, it's not getting over.
If I could jump back just a little bit.
Go ahead.
The comment on the booker. Portland's first real booker that we know about was Rip Oliver. He was officially the first booker that we know of in Portland. And then when he left to go get his cup of coffee with the WWF, that's when Lynn Denton, the grappler, got the call to come in, who got some great recommendations to come in. And that came into a period that was pretty stale for Portland. And Grappler had some new ideas and elevated some different people. Some new people came in, Scotty the Body, of course. And so some new things came in, but those were really the first real bookers who had that official title in Portland.
Dave Meltzer really got fascinated with Portland during that time because I remember in 88, late 88, 89, he was writing some glowing things in the Observer about Portland. That was when Art Bar was the Beetlejuice and a lot of those kinds of things.
When you saw a lot of Piper's influence at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And Piper, besides being on one of the upcoming shows, so Roddy did a lot of stuff when I started Portland Wrestling on the bringing it back on the CW in 2001. Roddy did a lot for me, him and the Grappler. So Roddy was a genius. I mean, he would come up, he would write storylines for people and just say, hey, go do this with this person. Or we had a finish that was set up and he goes, this would be better this way. Mm-hmm. But he was so smart and he understood psychology so well. I think that really helped to look at a person like Art Barr, who was thin and small, and he could wrestle because he had the lineage with Sandy and Jesse and all those Barr family members. But to take him and turn him into Beetlejuice, and instantly the guy's career took off. And of course, he went on to some great matches in Mexico and
Yeah, Love Machine.
Love Machine, an unfortunate ending in his life. But Roddy was so smart, and that really, when the crowds weren't great, because you had what Hulk Hogan was changing wrestling to, what Vince was changing wrestling to, and yet you still had Portland. So you didn't want fans in Portland, didn't want WW, didn't want Hulk Hogan, but they didn't want maybe Stan Stasiak from '65.
Right.
Who was my favorite. First person I ever saw in a wrestling match was Stan Stasiak versus Don Leo Jonathan in October of '65. So I've always liked Stan. So no offense, Stan. But he was able to transform Art Barr into this character that the kids loved, that the fans would crowd around. So I owe Roddy a lot for what he did for me in Portland wrestling, whether it was booking or stepping in. We had a match at the Salem State Fair, and it was supposed to be Fidel Sierra, Dave Sierra against Hacksaw Jim Dugan. There was truly a hurricane in Florida, and so Hacksaw couldn't fly out, and Roddy was supposed to be the guest referee, and he just said, well, I'll do the flag match, and had a great match. The bled buckets, the both of them, and but that was the kind of guy Roddy was. If he liked, like, he would come back for Don Owen, even though he was under contract at the WWE. He had that allegiance to the area and loved Oregon, and so I always appreciate what Roddy did.
You bet. And he had been, I mean, some of the greatest runs of territories and bookers. He had worked for them all. He had worked in Carolinas, he'd worked in Georgia, he'd worked in Texas, worked in LA, worked in the WWF. I mean, a guy like him who would pay attention could really pick up a lot from all of that. Plus, he had his own creativity as well.
Right.
Well, tell everybody what you guys got coming up. Tell everybody where they can find you guys and what you're doing.
Go ahead,
Well,
Frank.
Okay. So all of Mike's books, of which now you were very kind to say that I helped write. I wrote very little of these books. Some of the women and the midget coverage in the encyclopedia I did, but Mike did the 99.9% of the writing. I was the editor, which took up like 7 years of my life. No, I'm kidding. Well,
you guys are like Lennon and McCartney. We don't care. We just like the book,
Yeah, so the books are all available on Amazon. You can look up Mike Rogers Wrestling, and they'll pop up. You can buy them there. I have a YouTube channel called Portland Wrestling 2000s, where I've started doing some of the old Portland wrestling tapes. We're covering them. We covered Piper and Rose breaking up in a famous match. We've done an Andre, and then I have some of the stuff that I did for Portland wrestling, my own Portland wrestling that we're covering. We just did a tribute to Don Costa, a longtime Portland wrestling announcer who recently passed away, and so we did a tribute to him. And so you can find us on Portland Wrestling 2000s. But the books and I've heard rumors. I'm not putting any pressure. Mike, don't feel any pressure, but there's a rumor that there might be another sort of a wrestling book coming out here in this next year.
Oh, great.
I can't tell you any more than that, but I'm putting, like I told when Mike and I went out for lunch, and I kept telling him, you need to do a book, you need to do a book, you need to do a book. And finally he did a book. 6 books. I'm going to convince him that this next book is going to be a big one too.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. Well, listen, thank you guys, Mike Rogers, Frank Culbertson. I appreciate everything you've done for wrestling history, especially in Portland, and just for wrestling history. It's going to be around for generations to come, and that's what we need, because if we don't do these things, all of this stuff will be lost. So thank you for documenting it and putting it into these wonderful books that we can have and enjoy. And someday somebody will get my whole library.
Thanks for having us on, Tony.
You bet.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, fellas. All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Portland wrestling. I learned some stuff. Of course, I didn't grow up with Portland wrestling, but every time I talk to those two dudes, man, I get lots of great information about the great Don Owen, the longtime promoter there in Portland, about the Portland Sports Arena, and all of that stuff, man. I just love it. I could just sit and listen to those guys talk about Portland wrestling all day long. Frank Culbertson and Mike Rogers. And check out, get one of the great books that they have written. I mean, there's 5 or 6 of them. I held them up there during our conversation. So I hope you enjoyed sitting in on that visit, and also my visit with Steve Verrier and Richard Vicek about the book they've written on Wilbur Snyder. And boy, just a great show today. Thank you so much to all my guests who came by. And this show is great because of one thing, because of the people who have agreed to partner with me and to come on here and share their memories, share their viewpoints, share their experiences, and share their work that they've done to preserve pro wrestling history. Hey, I've got some stuff out there that you can come be a part of if you're interested. You can come join our Facebook group. Just search for Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel or search for me and my name, Tony Richards. Be sure and answer the questions that I ask for membership, and also make sure you agree to the group rules, because if you don't, I'm not going to let you in. And the reason is because I have an obligation to protect the members of my group. And I take that very, very seriously, because scammers and spammers cannot answer those questions. They cannot agree to the rules, because those bots don't do that. So if I don't get agreement on it and I don't get those questions answered, I'm going to assume you're a scammer or you're a bot. And I don't want the group getting full of spam. I don't want my members getting ripped off and getting their profiles duplicated and all that crazy stuff that happens on Facebook. So if you don't answer the questions and you don't agree to the rules, I'm not going to let you in. And I hope you understand that it's to keep the integrity of the group strong and to keep my members protected. Over on X, you can follow me at Tony Richards 4. I do a lot of posting over there. I do a lot of conversations and interacting with people on X who want to have great conversations about pro wrestling history. And so come on over there and be a part of that. You can also visit, I mentioned earlier, my Substack channel, Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com. When you subscribe to my newsletter, it helps support the work I do to preserve pro wrestling history. Plus, you get it in your email inbox, the Daily Chronicle, every single morning, and you don't want to miss an issue or a free podcast here that we do, personalities, territories, towns, and buildings. And we're working on getting a wider distribution for our show. So you should be able to find it on almost any podcast platform really soon. Next week here on the show, I'm going to welcome back my good friend, our East Texas wrestling analyst, Greg Klein. He does East Texas for us here. We're going to be doing some things in Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Corpus Christi, and Houston next week during the summer of 75 that you don't want to miss. I appreciate your investment of time that you make in our show and in me every single week. I hope you'll like and subscribe our podcast. And until next time, everybody, here in the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. Tune in for another great episode next week, interviewing wrestlers, referees, and media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. We'll release a new episode soon. Don't you dare miss it.